Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a beast. If you're prepping for your IGCSEs, this is definitely one of the big ones. We're looking at Vietnam.
But we're not trying to do the whole thing.
Oh God, no, that would take days.
We're really focused on the prologue,
Yeah.
the how on earth did we get here part. We're basically tracking from the 1940s up to that massive escalation in 1965.
Which I think is the most confusing part, because you see the end result, 500,000 American troops, napalm, all of it, and it just seems inevitable.
It really wasn't.
And to prove that, I want to start with source B. I was looking at this photo from 1945, and I honestly had to double-check the caption.
I know exactly what you mean.
You've got these American soldiers, and they're standing next to this very thin, intense-looking Vietnamese guy. They're smiling. And that man is Ho Chi Minh.
The future enemy number one.
Exactly.
Okay.
So the mission today is to solve that mystery. How do you go from that photo allies fighting the Japanese together to the U.S. dropping more bombs on his country than were dropped in all of World War II?
It's a tragic arc. And to get it, you really need to look at four things. First, the French connection. Then the ideology, the domino theory. Then the disaster of the leader they backed, Diem,
And finally, the spark.
and the spark that lit the fire, the Gulf of Tonkin.
Okay, let's start with the deep history, because Source K makes a point that I think most people just completely miss. Vietnam wasn't, some new country.
Not at all. Look, if you want to understand the Vietnamese mindset, you have to get this. For 1,000 years, they were ruled by China. 1,000 years. And they fought them off.
So resistance to foreign rule is basically in their DNA.
It's cultural muscle memory. So when the French rock up in the 1800s, they're just the latest in a very long line of invaders.
And the French create what they call Indochina.
Right, which, just for the exam, is Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. They get rich off rice and rubber. But then World War II happens. Japan invades, kicks the French out.
And this is where Ho Chi Minh really steps onto the stage. He forms the Viet Minh. And we should probably pause on that name.
Oh, good catch. The acronyms get so messy later. The Viet Minh were nationalists. Their goal was simple, get the Japanese out. And since the U.S. was also fighting Japan.
They were allies, hence the photo.
Exactly.
So 1945, Japan surrenders. Ho Chi Minh declares independence. He even quotes the American Declaration of Independence. He thinks he's won.
And this is the first huge what-if moment. President Roosevelt, FDR, he was very anti-colonialism. He did not want France to just get its empire back.
But he died.
He died. And Harry Truman took over.
And Truman just flips the script. Why? If America stands for freedom, why hand Vietnam back to the French?
You have to zoom out. It's the Cold War. Truman is terrified of communism spreading in Europe. He needs France as a strong ally in NATO to contain the Soviet Union.
So he sacrifices Vietnam to keep France happy in Europe?
It's pure realpolitik. Then, in 1949, Mao takes over China. Now you have this gigantic communist country right on Vietnam's border.
Yeah.
The panic meter in Washington goes to 11.
So supporting France isn't just about being nice anymore.
Now it's about stopping the red tide of communism.
And they really put their money where their mouth was. Source N says that by 1954, the U.S. was paying for, 80% of the French war costs.
80%?
Huh?
They were bankrolling the entire war. But money can't buy victory against a guerrilla army fighting for its home.
Which brings us to the absolute catastrophe for the French at Dien Bien Phu.
A total humiliating defeat.
Right.
The French army, surrounded, battered into submission, they were done.
So everyone goes to the negotiating table. The Geneva Accords of 1954. This is a huge one for your revision list. What was the deal?
Well, it was a messy compromise. They agreed to temporarily split Vietnam in half at the 17th parallel.
North and South.
Right, north goes to Ho Chi Minh and the communists.
Yeah.
South to a non-communist government.
Yeah.
But, and this is the absolute key detail, it was meant to be temporary.
Because there were supposed to be elections?
National elections were promised for 1956 to reunite the country under one government.
But those elections never happened.
They did not. And the reason, the U.S. government was brutally honest about it later. They knew Ho Chi Minh was a national hero.
He would have won.
He would have won in a landslide. Maybe 80% of the vote. So the U.S. and the new South Vietnamese government just blocked the vote.
Wow. Source I points out the irony there. The U.S. is yelling at Stalin for not holding free elections in Europe, and then they do this.
It is deeply hypocritical. But in the Cold War mindset, stopping communism was more important than promoting democracy.
Which really brings us to the big question, the why. Why did the U.S. care so much about this, relatively small country thousands of miles away?
2 words. Domino theory.
Right, we hear this term all the time. But what did it actually mean to someone like President Eisenhower at the time?
You have to get inside their heads. They didn't see communism as a bunch of separate nationalist movements. They saw it as one giant global monolith controlled by Moscow.
So if Vietnam falls, it's not just Vietnam.
Exactly. Look at the map in Source A. They truly believed that if Vietnam fell, it would knock over the next one. Laos, then Cambodia, then Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia.
All the way to the Philippines. Dulles, the Secretary of State, called it the Rice Bowl of Asia.
He did. They believed if the communists controlled those resources and that strategic position, the U.S. would effectively lose the Pacific.
There's also a domestic politics angle, isn't there? The card source mentions that no politician wanted to seem soft on communism.
Oh, that was a huge factor. The Republicans had hammered the Democrats for losing China. No president wanted to be the guy who lost Vietnam. It became a political trap. You couldn't back down.
So you have the theory. Now you just need your guy on the ground in South Vietnam. And they pick Dien,
The man in the white suit.
Yeah.
The U.S. went all in on him. They sent $1.6 billion in aid in the 1950s to prop up his government.
Why him? I mean, was he a good leader?
No, he was a terrible politician. But he had the one thing the Americans cared about. He was a fierce anti-communist.
But looking at sources Q&R on the ground, he was a total disaster.
He was deeply unpopular. First, he was the one who canceled the election, so he instantly looked like a dictator. Second, he was a devout Catholic in a country that was like 90% Buddhist.
And he didn't just ignore them. He actively persecuted them.
He did. He gave all the best government jobs to Catholics. He restricted Buddhist celebrations. It created massive resentment.
And the American-backed solution to this growing unrest was the Strategic Hamlet Program. Can we just break this down? The name sounds almost nice.
It sounds like a lovely little village, doesn't it? It was basically a concentration camp policy. The idea was to separate the peasants from the communist guerrillas who were hiding among them.
So they just moved everyone.
Forcibly. They uprooted villagers from their ancestral homes, where their families had been buried for generations, and marched them into these fortified compounds with barbed wire and watchtowers.
And source Pissot says this backfired completely.
Spectacularly. I mean, you take a peasant who is probably neutral, you force him off his sacred land, and you lock him up. You haven't made him an ally, you've made him an enemy. It was the best recruiting tool the communists could have asked for.
And this is where we get the new name for the enemy. We had the Viet Minh fighting the French, but now we have the Viet Cong.
Right. And to be clear for the exam, the Viet Cong, or VC, were South Vietnamese communists. They were fighting Diem's government and the Americans in the South.
And they were, frankly, terrifying. Source Q goes into their tactics. They knew they couldn't win a head-on battle.
So they used the jungle. They turned the landscape itself into a weapon. The source mentions bungee traps.
These were pits filled with sharpened bamboo stakes.
Yeah, hidden under leaves. And they'd smear the tips with poison or even human feces to guarantee a nasty infection.
This is awful.
It's psychological warfare. A soldier screams, his whole unit has to stop, they have to medevac him. It just grinds the American war machine to a halt and destroys morale.
So you've got this corrupt leader, a population that hates him, and a ghost-like enemy. The pressure is just building and building, and then in 1963 it just explodes. We have to talk about Source C.
The burning monk.
It's one of the most shocking photographs ever taken.
Thich Quan Duc, a Buddhist monk. To protest Diem's persecution, he just sits down in a busy Saigon street, has his fellow monks pour gasoline over him, and he lights a match.
And he doesn't move.
Doesn't make a sound. And that photo went everywhere. It completely destroyed any remaining legitimacy Diem had. President Kennedy saw it and basically said, we can't back this guy anymore.
So the U.S. pulls its support?
They do more than that.
Yeah.
They essentially gave a green light to Diem's own generals to overthrow him.
And in November 1963, they do. They arrest him and murder him.
And then, in this unbelievable twist of fate, just 3 weeks later, President Kennedy is assassinated in Dallas.
It's an incredible moment in history because Kennedy had been sending advisors, but Source L suggests he was very wary of sending in actual combat troops.
He was, but his successor, Lyndon B. Johnson, or LBJ, he saw things very, very differently.
LBJ was much more of a hawk, right?
He was a true believer in the domino theory. He was tough, and he was not going to be the president who lost Vietnam. He just needed an excuse to go all in.
And that excuse arrives in August 1964, the Gulf of Tonkin.
This is the pivot, the moment everything changes.
So walk us through it. What actually happened, or I guess what did they say happened?
Okay, so on August 2nd, the USS Mannix, an American destroyer, is in the Gulf of Tonkin, off the coast of North Vietnam. It gets fired on by North Vietnamese torpedo boats. That part is true.
But the Maddox wasn't just on a holiday cruise.
No, absolutely not. It was on an intelligence mission. It was spying. But then, 2 days later, August 4th, the ship reports a second attack.
But the consensus now is that the second attack, it didn't happen.
It almost certainly never happened. It was probably bad weather, freak sonar readings, and a very jumpy crew. But, and this is the critical point, the truth didn't matter. The report was all Johnson needed.
He goes straight to Congress and gets the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. What did that resolution actually do?
It was a blank check for war. It gave the president the power to take all necessary measures to repel any attack. Crucially, it was not a formal declaration of war.
Which sounds like a massive constitutional workaround.
It was. It let LBJ fight a full-scale war without ever having to officially declare one.
Oh.
If you look at the graph in Source G, the result is just a vertical line.
The troop numbers just skyrocket.
In March 1965, the first 3,500 Marines land. By 1968, you have over 500,000 American troops in Vietnam. The slippery slope just became a cliff.
Now, before we wrap, there's one other perspective here. Source H. It offers a much more cynical view of why this all happened.
The economic argument?
The military-industrial complex.
It sounds complicated, but the idea is simple. War is big business. Someone has to make the bombs, the planes, the helicopters. That's billions of dollars. And the argument is that these powerful defense companies and military leaders had an interest in keeping the war going because it was incredibly profitable.
And the great irony is that the person who warned America about this was
President Eisenhower, the same guy who pushed the domino theory. In his farewell address, he warned the public about its growing power. It's a good reminder that history is never about just one thing.
Okay, so we've gone through a lot. Let's boil it down. If you're listening to this cramming for an exam, what's the survival checklist?
Right. 5 key points. 1, the French. The U.S.-backed French colonialism to fight communism. 2, the Geneva Accords. The 1954 agreement to split Vietnam was temporary, but the U.S. blocked the unification election. 3, domino theory. The fear that if Vietnam fell, all of Asia would follow. 4, Diem. The corrupt leader the U.S. backed, whose awful policies like the strategic hamlets helped create the Viet Cong.
And the final trigger.
5, the Gulf of Tonkin. The 1964 incident, real or not, that gave President Johnson the power to send in hundreds of thousands of troops.
So the big insight beyond just the facts is what?
It's the sunk cost fallacy. At every stage, the U.S. thought, well, we've already invested this much, we can't back out now, so they doubled down. And then they doubled down again. It wasn't one single choice to go to war. It was 1,000 little decisions that dragged them deeper and deeper into the mud.
The tragedy of escalation. We'll leave you with this final thought. The entire American war was fought to prevent Vietnam from being unified under communist rule. But the international agreement from 1954, the Geneva Accords, said it was supposed to be one unified country all along. Was the war inevitable, or just a tragedy of missed off-ramps?
That's the question. Get that into your essay and you're on the right track.
You can check the show notes for a timeline and that domino theory map. Good luck with the revision.
And keep questioning the sources.
See you next time on The Deep Dive.